Who's talked to one? That's been more, as far as I know, that's not like a serious one. And people jokingly talked about like chopping California off just because. But we have talked about Puerto Rico. But Puerto Rico, they have to decide first and vote to say do they want to join into the United States. They do it about every 10 years. I think it was 3 years, it might have been 4 years ago now, that they voted. And as of right now, they like being a territory and not being a state, which is fine. I mean, hey, you can still be a territory.
That's the only one we talked about.
That's the only one that's kind of serious about it. So it's one of those, if someone else wanted to, they could, but it seems like everyone's kind of happy with the way they are for
I think we'll buy like land from Canada or Mexico.
Not in the near future. Not in the near future. Everyone's happy and everyone realizes that land is important. So no one's inclined to give up their land right now. So again, as of right now, probably not. Alright, so let's get into the homework. So 1 through 7 on page 59. So let's go through this first and then we'll review. Then we'll take the quiz. So, number 1, name 3 reasons for rivalry between Great Britain and France in the Ohio Valley. Brecken.
Okay, 3 reasons for rivalry between Great Britain and France in the Ohio Valley was over territory, fishing rights, and fur trade with the natives.
Good job. Number 2, what war broke out between Great Britain and France in 1754?
Little Ducks. The French and Indian War broke out in 1754.
Okay, yes. So, also, it was known as the 7 Years' War over in England. So, you might remember that name from world history. So, they called it 2 different things depending on where it was. We called it the French and Indian War because it was us against the French and Indians. Alright, number 3, Genesis. Number 3.
Benjamin Franklin's proposed family unifies
Say it one more time.
Benjamin Franklin's proposed plan for a union of the colonies was the Albany Plan.
Good job, Albany Plan. Number 4, describe Great Britain's advantages and disadvantages when she went to war in 1754. Alright, this one's the longer one. Chris.
Britain had superior manpower, agriculture, and sea power.
Alright, and disadvantages.
I didn't write down this one. I didn't know that it said disadvantages. I'll take the middle.
Yep, so just show it to me, just part of it. Show it to me today or tomorrow. But read this whole entire question. Make sure you're not going too fast, so just slow down. Make sure you covered everything.
At the point that I poured, my hand was hurting, so.
Sorry, but you gotta read. You gotta read all your homework. Alright, so what do you have, Genesis? Then going back to you then. What do you have for advantages and disadvantages?
Great Britain's advantages and disadvantages when she went to war with France in 1754 were that the advantages were superior manpower, agricultural, trade, and industry for troops, and control of high seas. The disadvantages were that they did not adapt the Albany Plan.
That's it? That's your only disadvantage?
Yeah.
Okay, what's another one? Ethan.
The French had Quebec and they were friends with the Indians and they had a more centralized government.
Good job. So we'll talk about the Albany Plan and why the colonists said, I don't really like it, and Britain said, I don't really like it. The only one that really liked it was Benjamin Franklin, because it was Benjamin Franklin's plan. But everybody else was kind of like,
Nerd.
I don't think I like this. And we'll talk about why the reasons for it. Alright, number 5. Who was placed in charge of Great Britain's war effort in 1757? Alright, Brecken.
William Pitt the Elder was chosen to lead Great Britain in the war in 1757.
Great job. Alright, number 6. What treaty formally concluded the French and Indian War and when was it signed? Alright, who wants to give their answer for this? Alright, Genesis.
Okay.
Oh, I thought that was waving.
That was
But
me. It was me.
The treaty that formally concluded the French and Indian War was the Treaty of Paris.
When was it signed?
1763.
Good job. You're going to notice that there's going to be several Treaty of Parises throughout history. That's because that's where a lot of them take place. So also you have to know the date with the treaty because Treaty of Paris is used like 70 times. So now again, we don't talk about it over and over again in this class, but it's something where you have to be aware of it. You okay with it, Brecken?
Yeah.
Alright, number 7. List and explain some of the differences between Great Britain and America after the French and Indian War. So these were basically our same people group, the territory people we had come from, but the Americans realizing, we're not like the English anymore. We've got some differences. Alright, give one, Chris.
The American Revival was one more started.
Yeah, so they stayed longer in America. Not saying that the English weren't revived. It was the idea of the effects lasted longer in America. Alright, Ethan.
Military differences.
Because what would did you like explain it or did you just write military? It just says
There were spiritual differences, military differences. And I won't say the last one. Because, you know.
yeah, how were they different militarily?
I don't know, there was just 3 differences. I put them on there.
List and explain. To make sure you get it. Yes,
If you're about to call on me, I'll take that green slip.
okay, well everybody Brecca, do you need a green slip?
I just put.
Will you break this up later
They
or
learn
after I do it?
different ways to fight.
I'll see. Okay, what you got? What you got? Read yours.
So, I said it shows people that they can have religion by themselves,
Okay.
and I also said it changed some ways that the military's fault. I don't know if that's right.
No.
It's alright. I mean, at least I tried to explain it.
You were explaining. Alright, anything else?
4 green corners.
Okay, I didn't explain the economic.
Oh, okay. Okay, so again, because you did work, you just didn't do all the work. Show it to me today or tomorrow before class, and I will tear them up and get rid of them. But you have to finish it before tomorrow, before class tomorrow. Alright, so make sure you're going to explain it. We'll go over it in class hopefully later on. Alright, you can go ahead and put that away for right now. So let's review your states and capitals because the quiz is coming up.
Can you just like review over them?
Can you quiz them and not have to say them in order?
Yeah, for real.
I'm assuming they're not going to be in
I'm
order.
blind. Can't.
It doesn't help anything.
Alright, we will read through them one time and then I'll do a random version. So that way it'll help out for those of you that are still trying to hopefully cram them into your head super fast. So, I'm sorry, Becky. Alright, so let's read through them really quick and then I'll call them randomly for it. Alright, so go ahead and start while I go around and collect my green slips. Go ahead and start on page, what?
You grabbed one already?
I think I did, didn't I?
What is this, world history or U.S.
This
history?
is U.S. history.
This is world history.
Alright, so 539, go ahead and begin.
Alabama, Montgomery, Alaska, June.
Alright, we gotta wait for them to catch up apparently. They don't know.
Arkansas, Little Rock.
Good job, Chris.
I'm still not done yet.
Ruined everything.
What was it?
I almost said it was the 37.
I don't care that you're here.
Alright, use your time properly then to study then. Use your time properly while we wait for Ethan and Brecken to finish writing super fast.
I'm sorry.
I'm offended.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
You can study too.
I have this.
Uh,
What page?
539.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's question 7. This is for most of you.
How many states and capitals are going to be on this quiz today?
Since there's 25 we're
25.
doing right now,
20.
it's going to be 10.
I labeled my paper already.
Alright, so let's read through them then. Alright, 539. Ready? Begin. Alabama, Montgomery, Alaska, Juneau, Arizona, Phoenix, Arkansas, Little Rock, California, Sacramento, Colorado, Denver, Connecticut, Hartford, Delaware, Dover, Florida, Tallahassee, Georgia, Atlanta, Hawaii, Honolulu, Idaho, Boise, Illinois, Springfield, Indiana, Indianapolis, Iowa, Des Moines, Kansas, Topeka, Kentucky, Frankfurt, Louisiana, Baton Rouge, Maine, Augusta, Maryland, Annapolis, Massachusetts, Boston, Michigan, Lansing, Minnesota, St. Paul, Mississippi, Jackson, Missouri, Jefferson City. Alright, so we'll just do this random call, so if you know it, just raise your hand for it. Alright,
Books away.
so,
I'm
he
ready
can
to
cram,
skip.
he can cram.
Thank you.
Because
I
he
can
wants to
cram.
cram.
I want to
Alright,
cram too.
if y'all want to have your books up to cram, that's fine for it. Alright,
Imagine.
I need to.
Springfield.
Illinois.
Oh,
Illinois.
you're Illinois. Okay.
Yeah,
Is
raise
that
your
what they
hand.
want to quiz?
Me?
Are we taking points?
No. Yeah, we can take points. Alright, raise your hand. Alright, Hartford.
Connecticut.
No, we should do popcorn.
Waste my
game.
time.
Popcorn.
Alright.
game. Popcorn. game.
Popcorn.
Okay, we'll do it fast then.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say basically, I'm not gonna waste time saying go, so we can go through these really fast.
Gotcha.
Alright, Missouri.
Missouri, that's Jefferson City.
Good job. Augusta.
Maine.
Good job. Cannot look and watch at the same time, so I remember which one I picked. Illinois.
Springfield.
Honolulu.
Wait.
That was Genesis.
Hawaii.
Good job. Hartford.
Connecticut.
Alright. Alaska.
Junior.
June.
Denver.
May.
I'm pretty sure that hand is still up. Oh, put your hand goes all the way back down.
Me.
Alright. Lansing. I'm sorry. Your hand was already up when I said go.
Michigan.
Alright. Baton Rouge. Okay, that was.
Louisiana.
Alright. Annapolis.
Wait.
Okay.
Maryland.
Good job.
Maryland?
Annapolis.
Okay.
I'm about to say, no question.
Indiana.
Indiana.
That was up here.
I said Indiana.
Say Indianapolis.
I said
Sorry,
Indiana.
Indianapolis.
Yes. Alright. Arizona.
Wait.
I think we're supposed to go.
Little Rock.
I said Arizona.
Oh, Phoenix.
Yes. Cheating. I just want to make sure he gets the right one. Alright. Jackson.
Wait.
That was easy.
Mississippi.
What was that?
Mississippi.
Mississippi. Let's see. No, that one. Oh, St. Paul.
Wait.
It was Chris. Just found it.
Minnesota.
Are you
Yeah.
kidding me?
Already, oh, Massachusetts. He's just fast.
Massachusetts, Boston.
I'm hopping back and forth between saying the state and saying the name. Which ones have I not said? Oh, Iowa. Okay, that was just barely, and then you said. Okay, Des Moines. But
Des
yes,
Moines.
as long as you can spell it, Des Moines.
Des Moines. Deported.
Georgia.
Atlanta.
I know we have to go through those. Oh, Florida.
Tallahassee.
What is this?
This is great.
Dover. He's just fast.
Delaware.
This is messed up.
Wait, did you say Delaware for Denver?
Oh, you said Denver, Colorado.
Okay.
I thought you said Dover.
You said
Is it
Dover.
I'm sorry. Dover, Delaware, Denver, Colorado.
Now I'm confused forever.
Oh no. Dover, Delaware. Dover, Delaware.
Delaware.
Okay. Denver, Colorado. I don't think I've said California yet.
Wait.
Oh, that was a question.
Okay, everyone down till it's fair. California. You raised your hand for it?
No.
He got it.
You did get it.
Oh,
Okay.
Sacramento.
Sacramento.
I lost it.
Alabama.
Chris has like.
Okay, I think that's all of them. Alright, anyone think that they got more than Chris? Ethan? How many points do you have, Ethan?
6.
How many do you have?
13.
I'll look you up a lot. Okay, 2 pieces of paper, pen, well, there's just one down front of the part where you don't need a cover sheet. So 1 piece of paper, pen, pencil.
Can I use the word?
Are we gonna like this every day? Like we can pick our own seat in the corner?
I'll think about it, but I like this. This works for me.
I just want to switch.
We should do that in chemistry.
No, 'cause I have to do math with y'all. I don't want to talk about the far corner word.
States and capitals.
Hold on. My boundaries are so messed up. Just like
And you do
that.
it in 10 questions?
I'm gonna do 10.
10 questions.
I live my
Why is it?
You say like all the easiest ones.
I can't pick all the easy ones.
Georgia.
I can't pick like Georgia,
Just only pick
Alabama,
the hardest
Hawaii.
ones.
Will you take off points if we get Georgia wrong?
I will sit there and I will frown upon you eventually.
Can you put it up on the wall?
No.
Okay.
Is it?
I don't see why not.
Ethan can see back there.
I'm pretty sure that's not listed as states and capitals.
No, but I don't need it anyway.
Don't look back there. I'm pretty sure it's just major cities. I don't think it's the capitals.
Alright.
Alright.
The capitals aren't major cities.
Not all the time. Like New York City is not the capital.
Denver.
Raleigh, North Carolina, it's not a capital.
Yeah,
No
so
one
it's
knows
one of
about
those, like,
Denver.
okay, just because you have an important city doesn't mean, like, Orlando is not the capital of
What's the
Florida,
capital
so-
of Vermont?
Oh, is Orlando the biggest?
It's the major one for tourism. So that's what most people think of.
Okay, what's
Yeah.
Montpelier?
Universal. Okay, we gotta go. Alright, so for these first ones, I'm gonna list the capital. You're gonna give me the state. So for these first 5, you're gonna write the state that it comes from. Yes.
Has to be spelled exactly the same.
It's the first one.
Yes.
What's the name?
What?
Small mistake for me to spell.
The 32nd.
Oh, okay.
Oh, so we spelled the whole
Guys.
name wrong?
Alright, so number 1. What state has the capital Phoenix? What state has the capital Phoenix? Sure to write it out, don't give the abbreviation. Hand that off right now.
Yeah, I know.
Give the full name. Number 2. What state has the capital Sacramento? Sacramento. Number 3. What state has the capital? Tallahassee. Tallahassee. Number 4, what state has the capital? Boston. What state has the capital? Boston. She's doing on purpose, I'm trying. Number 5, what state has the capital? Jefferson City. What state has the capital? Jefferson City. Alright, 6 through 10, I'm going to give the states. Now you're going to give me what the capital is. So, number 6, what is the capital of Mississippi? What is the capital of Mississippi? Number 7, what is the capital of Delaware? What is the capital? Great, Genesis. Delaware. Number 8, what is the capital of Hawaii? What is the capital of Hawaii? Number 9, what is the capital of Maine? What is the capital of Maine? Number 10, what is the capital of Louisiana? What is the capital of Louisiana? Alright, just so that we were clear, does anyone need any of them repeated?
Number 9.
Number 9, what is the capital of Maine?
Oh, how do you spell that?
Do your best. It's just 1 point off for spelling. Just try. Better to mingle it out and just lose 1 point. No talking even. We're up even. Alright, anyone need more time? Brecken, need more time?
Pretty square.
Alright, go ahead and take out your textbooks then. There's not really anything to really review yet because we just started the chapter yesterday. There's only like a couple of things. So like what is the major date? What is the major dates for the Great Awakening? Ethan.
1720 to 1730s.
17 what?
20 to 1730s.
You're a decade off. Go a decade up.
1820s to 1830s.
Decade, not century. Whoa.
Oh, 1730s, 1740s.
Yeah, 1730, 1740. Then you have to been recording because
Let's
Jennifer
say,
said, yeah, I'm not doing this. Jamie and Quentin have to take the quiz as well. You're recording. That's why we can't go over the answers right now, so ask me later after class and I can tell you which ones are which, but we can't talk about it. Okay, good. Alright, so thinking about it as well, what was the, I guess, church doctrine, church act, I guess that was passed that said, hey, if you're a descendant of a church member, you can be a church member too. This is for the Puritan churches in particular. Do you remember, Chris?
Is it a law? What is it?
It's like a church idea, so it's not really like a law or anything. The church said, hey,
How does it start? Like, what's the first word?
H.
H? And it was where?
It's for the churches in New England to boost their numbers. They said, hey, you can be a church member, you can't take part of communion, but you can be a church member if your parents were a church member.
I know, I just don't know how you want to say it. It's like the,
Skip the term.
Like, isn't it like the descendant?
Alright, do this.
Halfway at.
Halfway covenant. Halfway covenant. Halfway covenant. Alright, who founded Log College? He was one of the first guys to kind of talk about it. Now his son preached on the dangers of an unconverted ministry. Alright, what was his name? Brecken, you remember?
It's not Edwards, is it? That's the
Oh,
guy.
Edwards is coming.
It's
His name is William.
Yep.
What's his last name, sorry?
T.
T?
T.
William. How?
Alright,
William
anyone?
something.
Anybody know? Alright, William Tennant, making up Hamlin tip. Alright, who was the guy that preached sinners in the hand of the angry God, and he's also remembered as one of America's foremost theologians. This is one of the ones we talked about yesterday. Alright, Ethan.
Edward. Jonathan Edwards.
Jonathan Edwards, making up him. Alright, what? Man, I can't. Alright, so we are on George Whitefield. Now I know it looks like George Whitefield. I went and looked up pronunciation just to double check, and it is pronounced Whitfield. So I guess American pronunciation, we just got lazy, and so we say Whitfield and not Whitefield. Just make sure that you know how to spell it. So George Whitefield, that he was an evangelist that came over from England. Quick question.
You know what's one of his sermons?
No, because they couldn't record them back in the day. Oh, it's okay, they did. It's alright. So George Whitefield, that he came over from England. I know, sometimes we just forget. Sometimes we just forget that technology's only been around for a little while for what we're used to. It's okay. So he joined John Charles Wesley's Holy Club. This is over in England, and this is whenever. Thank you for remembering. This is whenever he was trying to basically earn salvation. He eventually realized that there's no way to earn salvation, that it has to be through faith alone. So once he got saved himself, he started preaching too. Now, he got barred or kicked off from England's pulpits because he was preaching messages, and the preachers and ministers over in England didn't really like him, but that didn't stop him. He decided, okay, well, if you're not going to let me preach in your pulpit, I'll go preach somewhere else. He ends up coming to America 7 times in order to preach to us over here. And he was also a traveling evangelist, just because no one really wanted him to take charge of the church, but they would allow him to preach in different situations for it. Alright, your book points out that Benjamin Franklin, he ends up becoming a good friend of Whitefield. It's kind of interesting because, as far as we know, was Benjamin Franklin saved? Someone raise your hand and tell me.
No.
Alright, Chris? What?
You just said it.
What did he say? I didn't call on Ethan, so what's your answer?
No.
Yeah, as far as we know, he wasn't saved. It seems like maybe later on in life that he might have gotten saved, but it's one of those, we're just not sure. He was a deist for most of his life, where he believed that God basically created the world, and then God just left it alone for man to fend for himself. We're not sure. Based on some of his later writings, it looks like that he might have got saved. We all hope so, because we like Benjamin Franklin and we want him to go to heaven. But it is something to where we're just not sure based on the writings for it. Alright, well, let's look at what Benjamin Franklin said. Now, your book has this quote at the top of page 53, just describing, saying this is how Whitefield's ministry, how it affected the community. Alright, who wants to read that quote? There's lots of reading today.
Wait, what page are we on?
We're on page 53. Genesis, what a volunteer.
It was wonderful to see the change he made in the manners of our inhabitants, from being thoughtless or indifferent about religion. It seemed as if all the world was growing religious, so that one could not walk through the town even without hearing songs from the different families of every street.
You know, so Benjamin Franklin was just pointing out that even though he himself might not have been saved, he understood that, okay, religion promotes good morality in a community, and so it helps people in order to live right. So he was saying, okay, this is helping out the communities in general. Alright, so with his booming voice, Georgeville could effectively reach crowds of 20,000 people, which is kind of ironic that we remember him as the most powerful voice of the Great Awakening, not just because he could actually speak loud, but it was because he was able to basically preach to thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So, just make a note that he's remembered as the most powerful voice of the Great Awakening, not just because of his booming voice and how loud he could project it, but just because he affected so many people. Alright, any question about George Whitefield or Jonathan Edwards? Alright, results of the Great Awakening. There are 4 of them and there are 4 of you. Alright, so Brecken, read the first one for us on page 53.
After the Great Awakening?
Yep.
Thousands of sinners were converted while countless believers were revived.
Good job. So people got saved and then Christians realized, oh, I need to live right. I can't just do something just because my parents did it. Alright, number 2, Ethan, page 53.
Okay. A new missionary spirit was kindled.
Good job. And so what does this mean? Sit up, Ethan.
It means that people wanted to go out and missionary people.
Yeah, and tell other people about it. Alright, number 3, Genesis.
New colleges were founded and
Alright, and yeah, we'll talk about the colleges. And then 4th one, Chris.
People's hearts were prepared for religious and political freedom. This widespread spiritual revival sweeping through the colonies just prior to their independence probably affected the course of American history.
Oh yeah, I just needed to just that one sentence. Yeah, so people's hearts were getting stirred up to basically say, okay, I need religious freedom, so that way I can worship God as however I want, and then also I want political freedom. I want to be able to make laws to benefit man, and I want to be able to have a say in those laws. Alright, next page. Your book points out that in a lot of cases, the kind of culture of America changed in this era as well. Where you had people, not only were hymns becoming more popular in this era, so we sing hymns in a lot of cases in church, or you sing songs or choruses in church, depending on what type of church you go to. That's considered part of church. Back in this era, it wasn't quite like that. So hymns, or singing hymns, was becoming more and more popular. People also felt a new concern for the poor and suffering. Some people were found in orphanages. Now remember, what's an orphanage? We haven't officially said in this class, don't treat anyone orphanages. All right, Ethan?
A place for kids that don't have parents.
So basically to take care of kids that no longer have living parents. And they also spoke out against the evils of slavery. Now, this is not the Civil War yet, but you're already having people realize, owning another person is not condemned by the Bible. We shouldn't do this anymore. So you have people that are already speaking out against it. Alright, missionary endeavors. To make a note of David Brainerd, make a note of him. He is the best known missionary to the Native Americans. So, David Brainerd. Now, he contracted tuberculosis. Anyone know what tuberculosis is? Chris? Yeah, now, back in this era, if you got tuberculosis, you died. Yeah, they didn't have abilities to cure it. Even today, it's still kind of hard to cure just for how what tuberculosis is. So, it's one of those, back then, if you got it, well, your days are numbered. You're gonna die.
Question.
Wait, okay, yes, question.
Did anyone barely survive or something? And
What?
Did people back then barely survive it? Or did they all die as soon as they got it?
As soon as it got, it wasn't like instant death, but basically it gets inside like the white blood cells in your lungs, and so your body starts trying to fight it. But one of the major signs is you start coughing up blood, and so that was like the major sign of when you started coughing up blood out of your lungs, you knew that you had that. And
Did anybody survive? Sometimes?
You might live for a couple years, but there's no one that's as far as I know, no one that got better and then continued living. Today we have medicine and stuff that can help you, but even today, tuberculosis is a disease that's kind of dangerous. Once you get it, you have to take it kind of serious, just because of how it fights in your body. It can get inside your white blood cells, so it can hide that way. That's part of the reason why it's something to be a little bit concerned about, and to treat it seriously, to go get help for. But back then, there was no help. If you got it, you died. That was it. So tuberculosis. So he contracted it. He died at the age of 29. So again, fairly young. Now again, that doesn't seem super young to y'all, but that was still decently young for back then. But he still went and was a missionary. He said, okay, even though I have this disease that's gonna kill me, I still want to serve God. Even though I'm not gonna live as long as other people, probably, I'm going to still serve God as long as I can for it. Alright, the book points out other missionaries went to other places. You don't have to know them, and I have to move, so we're not going to talk about them, because they were important, and they were missionaries, and they did take it to other lands. Alright, new colleges are founded. There are 4 of them that you need to know that grew directly out of the Great Awakening. Go ahead and mark them on the bottom of page 54. Princeton, Brown, Rutgers, and Dartmouth. So make a note of those 4. Those are the 4 colleges that grew directly out of this. And they were considered institutions of higher learning back then. Today, they're still considered good colleges in a lot of cases. So, they also strengthened religious freedom. So they were saying as well as okay, if we're going to worship God and get people saved, we need to be able to study the Bible, and we need to worship God as how we think is best for us. Now remember, what is the only colony that had complete separation of church and state in this era? That was called the colony. Alright, Chris? Rhode Island. And so, but you're having a lot of other colonists that are also saying, okay, we need to be able to worship God as how we see fit, not just belong to a certain church. You have to pay taxes to a certain church just because we live in a colony for it. Alright, there are also 2 major things that were getting people ready for political freedom. So let's look at that on page 55. Alright, so there are 2 here. There's a lot of lists today, so we're going to have to call on multiple people for it. So, what is the first thing with underneath political liberty on page 55? Reckon. Page 55. So, preparations for political freedom. So there were 2 things that people were saying, okay, now that we have the Great Awakening, there are 2 things to help us kind of get ready for political freedom as well.
The first one?
Yep.
If men are to have true religious freedom, they cannot be barred from political activity because of their religion.
And so that was part of it. Like in the Puritan states, like Massachusetts, you couldn't vote to make laws if you weren't a member of the church. And so they were saying, we should probably start to get away from that. And what was the second one? Genesis.
All men are equal in the eyes of God. All men deserve equal justice under the law.
Yeah, we were having to where they were basically not having even justice Now, keep in mind, this is not Civil War yet, but we're trying to get there where people are saying it shouldn't matter if I'm rich or poor, or an indentured servant or a freeman. I should get equal treatment under the law. If someone commits a crime, they should have the same punishment. It shouldn't show favoritism. So that's what they're saying. We shouldn't have it. Alright, before we finish up this section, let's read about Phyllis Wheatley really quick on page 54 in the box section. You need to note her. Alright, who wants to read first? There's lots of reading today. Alright, Chris.
One person ignorantly affected by the Great Awakening was Phyllis Wheatley, the first black female writer in America. As a child, Phyllis was kidnapped in Africa and taken to Boston, where a tailor, John Wheatley, purchased her as a companion and helped her for his wife. As Miss Wheatley taught the girl to read, Phyllis showed remarkable intelligence and talent. She quickly grasped the English language and began to study the Bible as well as Latin and classical words. Before long, Phyllis came to know Christ as her Savior.
Okay, so to note from that paragraph herself is that she is the first black or African American, if that makes you feel better, writer in America. So make a note for it. Now, it was considered common back then for someone to basically hire a companion for like the ladies that stayed at home. If you were having particularly like an elderly lady, because elderly ladies like to talk and there's no one to talk to, sometimes they would have basically a hired helper to where they would come in and keep the lady company, and then also they would help her around the house. So that's how come John Wheatley, he purchased her basically saying, okay, I want my wife to basically have this constant companion, basically like a friend, and to be a helper. So it wasn't like that they were purchasing her to be mean to her. He's saying this, you're basically going to be like a permanent friend for my wife. You're going to help her around the house, you're going to talk to her, you're going to keep her company. So it was a good deal. Now, I mean, it is sad that she was stolen and kidnapped from Africa, but she could have ended up in a worse situation. So she ended up, with God's providence, in a decent home in this case. Alright, who wants to read the next paragraph? Alright.
In 1770, at the age of 13, Phyllis published her first poem in 1773. She visited England, where she was well received by many notables of high society. As a result, her book, Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral, was published there. After the death of Mr. and Miss Wheatley, Phyllis married and bore 3 children.
Alright, so in a lot of cases, once you had an indentured servant, or a slave, a lot of cases, once their owners died, they became freedmen as well. So that's one reason as to why she could go off and get married and have kids at that point. So it wasn't like she was stuck forever. Alright, so let's look at the last paragraph. Who wants to read it? Alright, Ethan.
Phyllis Wheatley's poetry reflects the effects of the Great Awakening for America, and in spite of her slavery, she was thankful for being brought to America where she could hear the gospel. In her poem on being brought from Africa to America, she wrote, "'Twas mercy brought me."
Wait. Alright, Genesis, do you want to read the last bit? Alright, read the last bit. Good job, though.
"'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land. 'Twas my land soul to understand that there's a God and there's a Savior too. Once I redemption neither saw or knew. From view or sable, grace, the scornful eye, their color and diabolical eye. Remember Christianity was black as Cain, maybe be refined and join the angelic train."
Alright, so she's referencing a lot of things culturally in this piece, so let's go through it really quick. So that's what she's saying in those first couple of lines. "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land, taught my united soul to understand." Now, Christianity was not in Africa yet, so she understood that, okay, my land was pagan religiously, not like the land itself is bad. But she understood, okay, there's no Christianity in Africa. If I stayed there and grew up there, I would have died a sinner and gone to hell. So she didn't, okay, there was no way for me to get saved there. Second part, there's a God and there's a Savior too. Once I redemption neither sought nor knew. She's saying, I didn't even know about God. I didn't seek God, but God in His providence had me brought over to America because He wanted me to come to America in His plan and His will. Alright, the next section. Some view our sable race with scornful eye. That's reference to the darker color. Their color is a diabolic dye. A lot of people were using the logic, and this is not good logic, this is how they justified it back in the day, that they were saying that because of their darker skin tone, that they were closer to Satan or the devil's color, which again does not logically make sense and it doesn't work, but that's how people were justifying their actions. And that's what it's talking about in that last section. Remember, Christians, Negroes, black as Cain, may be refined and join the angelic train. in this time period, Negroes were just referred to just dark-skinned people, and that's how come she's saying, remember Christian, even though you have a dark-skinned person, dark as Cain, now we don't know for sure what was the color of Cain and Abel, but they associated Cain as an evil person, and so they associated being a dark color with being evil, which again, is not factual, it doesn't work, and that's sad that a lot of people had this mindset back in the day. That's what she's saying. They may be refined and join the angelic train. They can get saved, is what the idea she's saying. And she put it very nice in the poem. But that's what she's saying. It's just, hey, just because you have someone that is dark skinned and they come from Africa doesn't mean they can't get saved. They can still get saved and they can still do good things. Alright, so major things to note. Just make sure that you make a note that she was the first black female writer or first African American female writer. Alright, we have a question about Phyllis Wheatley before we move on to the next section with the French and Indian War. Alright, French and Indian War. So, we were in the mainland area over here with British North America. You don't have to know this map. This is a map from 1800, but your book's just kind of referencing it now. That a lot of these states aren't quite here yet, but they're coming. So, we have the 13 colonies up in this section. You have France more in the Canadian area. Now the British will take over it. That's kind of common when it comes to this is British up here. But you have the French up in this section. So as you have people seeking new land, we can't go east because of the ocean. We can't go south because of more water or the Spanish. And we can't go north because France is already dibbed in this section. The only way left for us to go is west across the country. Well, the French up here were also going west, and they also started going down into this Ohio area. So you're having the two different colonists are basically running into each other, and they're both trying to dib the same land. Now, England and France, the countries, were also having squabbles or having trouble with each other. So, because of all of the tension, there were several wars fought throughout history, in particular in this particular section between England and France. Your book only references really the last one, because that's one that's important to us. Several of them happened and they kind of just spread over into America because England and France were fighting. This one started over here for us in North America, and then the conflict went over to England and France. So this is why we talk about this one more as opposed to all of them. So that's the reason why we focus on this one. This one is called the French and Indian War because it's us versus the French and the Indians together. Because remember, the French and the Indians, they were better friends than we were, because a lot of the British weren't super nice to the Indians. And so because of that, the Indians did not really like the British colonists that much, but they did go along with the French. Alright, so next page. Your book has a chart at the top of the page showing you here's the different wars involved in Britain and France. We're going to see this one reason why France helps us out later during our war for independence. But there are several wars fought between Britain and France. The only one you really need to know is the last one, the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War. So just make a note for that. But there's 2 different names for it. We called it the French and Indian War because it's us versus the French. They called it the 7 Years' War because it lasted 7 years for them. Now, you'll notice that the dates don't quite match. That's because for us, the war ended earlier than it ended in England. So again, just because of where it's taking place and who's fighting, you have slightly different names for it. Alright, so the first clashes for it. One of the major kind of first conflicts that was happening was up in the Virginia area. So the French were trying to claim forts along major rivers. Why did they want rivers in this time period? What was important about the river besides just like water? Right, isn't it? Yeah, so and you can move supplies much easier on the water route than you can across land. You could move it across land if you really wanted to, but it was cumbersome and it was hard. Okay.
What's it like from where you only transportation back then?
Yeah, I mean, you could go by land, but keep in mind, if you're going through like mountains or if you're going through woods, you're gonna have to hack your way through the woods if it's not wide enough for your buggy or your cart to go through. So because of that, they said, nope, waterways are the way to go. It's already there. I can build a boat easily, and I can just go downstream and carry my supplies that way. It's so much easier. So water routes were the major ones for it. So as the French, as they were going down water routes, they were basically building forts along either side as they went, basically saying, okay, dibs as we're going through it. So there was a fort built along the Ohio River Valley, and Governor Robert Dinwiddie, make note of him, he sent George Washington to go basically talk to them and tell them that you need to get out of this area. This is our area. Now, this is the same George Washington as we will talk about later. So be sure to mark your book, this is the same guy. He's only 21 years old at this time period, and he's a surveyor and a major. So he's not like a general yet, he's still young. But this is good because he gets practice fighting in this conflict and learns how to fight in this. So he was sent with a message to the French at Fort Lebeau that they occupied territory that belonged to Virginia, and you guys need to leave. The French said, no, we're staying here. Well, George Washington basically looked around the fort and took stock of their preparations and their ammunitions and how their fort was fortified. And then he went back and he told the governor, this is how many guns they have, here's how much ammunition they have, here's their supplies. And because he showed such wisdom and basically using his eyes and noticing and being basically a spy, the governor said, this person's smart. I'm going to promote him to lieutenant colonel. So, just make a note for George Washington with Robert Dinwiddie. Now, Robert Dinwiddie, he is the governor, and George Washington, this is the first time we've seen him, be sure to mark him as well for it. Alright, Colonel Washington also advised that the English build forts at different rivers in the area, basically saying we want those forts as much as possible. Unfortunately, the French got there first, and they built the forts faster than we could. So they built Fort Duquesne. So make a note for that one. Duquesne is how you technically say it. So just make a note for that. Colonel Washington and his militia, they tried to fight it, but since it was a strategic fort, it was very hard and very difficult to be able to take that fort. Alright, so the French, they strengthened their position though, prepared to defend their territory in the Ohio Valley. One of the major kind of acts that was kind of talked about in this era was they wanted to say, okay, each colony in each state was treating it like it was their own little separate conflict. They were not united together as we are the United States all fighting together to go fight the French. It was basically like Virginia fights the French, Massachusetts fights the French, Delaware fights the French. It wasn't the idea of all of us all together. And so Benjamin Franklin and several of the other founding fathers or early people were saying, this isn't working quite well. We need to maybe do something a little bit better. Maybe we should unite ourselves all together and all of us work together to fight the French. So 7 colonists sent several colonies sent delegates to a conference at Albany, New York. That's why it's called the Albany Plan, because it happened at Albany, New York. They were called by the British government, since the British government was technically in charge of the colonies. Benjamin Franklin, he proposed the Albany Plan. He said that, okay, you're going to have a governor general appointed by the king and a council composed of delegates selected by the colonial assemblies. With the council, with the king's approval, would have the power to manage Native American affairs, pass laws, and levy taxes, and for the common defense of the colonies. Because of how it was worded, the colonists said, I don't know if I like this, and Great Britain said, I don't know if we like this. We didn't like it as the Americans because we didn't want to give up our power of taxation. We did not want to have another body of people be able to tax us. Now again, the only person that could tax us right now was our colony assemblies. Technically the king was over us, but that was it. Parliament, we said, could not tax us, and we didn't want to really say or give Parliament the authority to start taxing us. So we said, I don't know if I like this. Great Britain didn't like it because Great Britain didn't like the idea of all the colonies uniting together. Great Britain was starting to get a little bit suspicious of the colonies uniting together and then going and rebelling against Great Britain, which they were right in the long run because we do end up fighting against Great Britain. But they were saying, we don't know if we want you guys working together. We kind of like you all being separate because you won't work together, and if something happens, we can deal with it easier. So because of that, the Albany Plan was never officially started. Do make a note that Benjamin Franklin proposed it, and it was proposed at Albany, New York. Alright, anyone have any questions about that? Alright, so several advantages of the French and the British during the French and Indian War. Alright, Brecken, read that first one for British advantages.
Superior manpower. The British population in America was 20 times larger than the French.
Good job. Read the second one, Chris.
Agriculture, trading, industry to keep troops supplied with that.
Good job. And the last one, Genesis.
Control of the high seas and implement interfere with French attempts to land troops and supplies in America.
Good job. So those were the British advantages. What was a French advantage? Alright, Ethan.
A centralized colonial government, while the British lacked central authority and had contended with bickering local and colonial government system. The the French government encouraged speed and efficiency in military decisions.
Good job. So that was one reason as to how come Benjamin Franklin proposed the Albany Plan, because basically if you needed one group to work with another, you would have to have both governments agree to work together, and that just took time, because there's no texting back in this day or email, so you have to go send someone with a letter, and it just took too long. So Benjamin Franklin was saying, okay, we need to move faster, and the colonists are saying, I don't know if I like this stuff, but we do eventually work together more. Alright, look at the second one. Alright, Ethan.
The well-fortified city of Quebec enabling them to defend the strategic St. Lawrence River and
Right up, and then the last one, Chris.
Alliance with most of the Native American tribes except the Iroquois and the Cherokee.
Good job. So your book's just pointing out that the French got along with the Native Americans, except for those two Indian tribes. And so because the French would help them. Plus, in some cases, I said French. The Native Americans would help them. In some cases, the Native Americans were also kind of bitter at a lot of the British colonists coming over, and so that's the reason why they said, okay, no, we'll help you be able to get them out for it. Alright, oh, your book references Quebec. We're going to talk about Quebec in a second, but you'll remember what was the year for the founding of Quebec. Now, this is way back in the previous chapter. Okay. 1608, correct. Alright, so, course of the war. You'll notice in this map and in the map in your book that there's a lot more battles referenced, and then your book has time to get into. Your book's already like 500 pages, so your book just is that. Okay, we're going to pick the most important stuff and then chop out the other. So, if you like history or if you like studying this, feel free to study it on your own. We just don't have time to get into every single battle and every single thing, particularly with World War I, World War II, and Civil War. You could spend days, up to weeks talking about it, and we just don't have time. So, that's the reason why your book references it, but then just moves on. One of the major battles, or one of the major kind of events that was talking about that was Edward Braddock. Make a note of him that he was the British general in charge of the troops. Now, European fighting traditionally said that you line up your troops in a straight line, all of you march out together, and then you shoot the other side. That's how wars were traditionally fought over in Europe. In America, we don't fight that way. Because of how our land was, and because we had fought against the Native Americans, and the Native Americans don't fight that way, and then an American says, why should I go stand out in the open to shoot at you when I can hide behind a perfectly good tree and shoot at you? That works much better for me. Keep in mind, in this era, guns weren't super accurate either. If you point your gun at someone and shoot, depending how far away you are, the bullet may miss them entirely, just because muskets and other guns were not super reliable. That's the reason why it's considered kind of like a gentleman's warfare, where you all line up and shoot together. Now, George Washington told General Edward Braddock, we don't fight like this in America. We hide behind trees and rocks and stuff because we'd like to survive the war, not just go out and just shoot at the other person. He ignored Washington's advice about wilderness warfare, and he kept his troops doing that. He ended up dying, getting shot from it, and he had a lot of his own troops killed because of it. So he gets replaced later on, probably because he was dead. And then partly because George Washington and the other colonists knew this guy's it's not working. It's not going to work for him. Alright, that's all the time I have, so we're going to have to go ahead and stop there. Alright, for tonight. Alright, read pages. Alright, now finish chapter, so 58 through... Alright, 58 through 65. 58 through 65. That's what the curriculum calls for. I'll be a little bit nicer, and we'll say 1 through 10 even. So make sure you're reading though, because I gotta talk fast tomorrow. So 1 through 10 even.
On page.
On page 65. So read pages 58 through 65. Answer page 65 questions 1 through 10 even. So I'll help you out a little bit. Alright, what's due? Not tomorrow, but next Wednesday.
Well, the editorial that I did not vote on.
I'm sorry, you were outvoted. This is why we don't have democracy. We have representative democracy. That way the minority votes still count. Alright, have a good day.
Good call.
What's up,
You were
dude?
right. You start staring off your face. I thought you were